So our next speaker, Susan Goodwin, is a social policy academic, and Ranjit Voola is a business academic, which makes them at the two ends of the academic spectrum. In this presentation, Susan and Ranjit briefly debate the role of business and social policy in poverty alleviation and highlight the importance of collaboration between different fields to solve complex issues such as poverty. Please join me in welcoming Susan and Ranjit to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Ranjit.
And that's Susan.
To be clear. Slide. Take it away, Ranjit.
Okay, we don't have slides, but we'll start anyways. So, we do. Okay, great.
Skeptical already.
You might be wondering what I'm doing here with the shiny shoes, shiny red tie, and talking about poverty alleviation. There is a purpose to that. But firstly, Susan and I come from two ends of the university, physically, theoretically, and practically. And we have very, good sense of skepticism between social policy and business. But we figured out in the last 2 years that actually the way we go forward is by engaging with proactive skepticism, but collaborating together. So just to start off with, so the goal number 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals is end poverty. And I actually believe it's kind of a cohesive core to all the other Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at some of the targets, we would like to end extreme poverty by 2030. So just last week, the World Bank has raised what extreme poverty means. It's $90 per day. Which is still very little. So if you go to the next slide, Susan. Okay, so why should businesses, for-profit businesses, engage in poverty alleviation? Well, we at the business school believe, of course, all of us have a moral imperative, but there's also an economic imperative. For some of you, it might seem like, what is this guy talking about? Well, I'm sure Mahatma Gandhi thought the same when he questioned why you have to fight with swords. Why can't you fight without swords, but still fight? So he redefined fighting. And if you look at Copernicus, he said, why should everything go around the earth? Maybe everything goes around the sun. Amazing insight at the time. He was put in jail for that. So what I'm trying to say is that counterintuitive arguments require people to stand up like yourself and question why. And of course, there's an economic imperative I'll talk about a little bit later. And expectations of governments and consumers are all changing. So if you look at the developed countries, you look at Australia, UK, the US, if you look at the aid policies, one of the dramatic changes has been how can we engage with poverty, with businesses to alleviate poverty. And not only developed countries, but developing too. The Prime Minister of India, Modi, he talks about technology and the private sector to alleviate poverty. And consumers, I think there's a kind of a shift. Previously, they said, businesses should not do evil. But I believe they're also saying businesses should not do evil, but also do good. So there is a definite shift to that. And the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals, does anybody know how much money it's going to take to actually implement all of this stuff? I don't even know how many numbers that is, but it's 4 trillion. Okay? So apparently, it's estimated that it requires $4 trillion to actually implement this stuff. The state is at the forefront doing this, but the private sector has to be involved. And the basic argument is complex issues such as poverty alleviation obviously requires greater collaboration. Next slide. Okay, so in business, we're not just talking theoretically. There are actually many models that are coming along. What's the population of the world? 7 billion. How many people live on less than $5 a day? Okay, a number, about 4 billion. So 4 billion out of 7 billion people live on less than $5 a day. So what have businesses been doing? They've been targeting the 3 billion, right? What happened to the 4 billion? Aren't they people? Don't they want to go out and movies or wash their hands. Isn't there a business imperative there? There is. But the key to that is the way we look at business now is, I guess, low volume and high margins. We need to rethink that. Basically, high volume but low margins. Okay, so basically what I'm suggesting is that these models are reshaping how we think about business, and business has a huge role to play in this. Suzanne.
Okay, so when Ranjit first introduced me to the idea of alleviating poverty through profitability, or these ideas like high volume, low profit, I was deeply skeptical. I thought, yeah, right, sure. And the first thing that, of course, sprung to my mind was the Nestle baby formula disaster of the 80s that we're still living with. So I'm still skeptical. But that my skepticism doesn't mean I think it's wrong or I think the ideas are wrong. And what I think is interesting is to have a skeptical, productive engagement with these ideas. So you might be asking, why am I so skeptical? I'm a social policy academic, and my work has largely focused on mitigating the adverse effects of capitalism, which, by its very nature, fails huge groups of people. People too young, too old, too sick, too busy caring for others to participate in the labour market, people without skills or access to the labour market, and peoples whose roots to traditional roots to economic well-being have been dismantled by global capitalism. So in social policy, we use the term social protection, which essentially means pooling our resources as a society outside of market imperatives to ensure all members of society can survive and flourish. Interestingly, in my engagement with Ranjit and the world of business, I often hear businesses talking, oh, I've got a really great idea. Why don't we all contribute a levy as businesses to a pool so that we can provide these forms of social protection? And I say, we already have that. That's called the taxation system. And there's benefits for doing that through a government-organised, planned way that's probably going to be a little bit more successful than a range of businesses in a discretionary manner pooling and redistributing resources. So my work then has focused on how best to civilise or tame capitalism through government policies and through community development. So, for example, the implementation of universal healthcare or universal education, universal income support, the redistribution of wealth across the life course, and community-based initiatives aimed at corroding the domination of populations by self-serving businesses. So you can see how can we work together with this kind of skepticism with the shared goal of alleviating poverty. And one of the things that we have done is focus on social justice principles and to look at the way in which social justice principles can be applied across the kind of work we do in government and policy development, across the kind of work we do at the level of not-for-profit, community-based civil society activity and business activity. So one of the contributions I've been making, is that the right?
No, you had to go back, I think.
Go back.
Yeah.
To the work in the business school and the work in the Poverty and Profitability Network is to provide a forum for debating and contesting and thinking about the kind of social justice principles that we debate and contest and have as our anchor in social policy and community development work. So, for example, the human rights principle of the inherent dignity of all individuals is something that business students and businesses are asked to think about and ask questions about what things should be for sale, what things shouldn't be for sale, what commodities debase or demean people, what commodities lift people's dignity up. The principle of equality and non-discrimination is something that we certainly use in our social policy and community development work. Similarly, businesses can ask if products and services for sale in these 4 billion markets increase or reduce social divisions. Do they undermine existing forms or existing equality strategies, such as the welfare state? The principle of participation and empowerment certainly is at the centre of the community development work that we do, and we encourage the democratisation of social policies. Do markets produce new dependencies that make people vulnerable to exploitation, or can they be geared towards the creation of empowered individuals, families and communities? And finally, can the private sector embrace the principle of sustainability? And it's something we as community development workers and social policy advocates grapple with as well, both social sustainability and environmental sustainability. We know from the state of the environment that short-term, environmentally careless strategies to make money are no longer feasible. You listening, Ranjit?
Yeah. Yes, I am, Suzanne.
There are no quick fixes in poverty alleviation, so businesses need to see that what they make and sell has implications for the next generations. And one way we think about this in my area is what we want is an economy where no one and nothing is wasted. So as I said, these principles are heavily debated, and it's really fascinating and really interesting for me to talk through these principles with MBA students and business leaders and people trying to do social good through business.
Next slide, please. So Suzanne, if social policy was the antidote for poverty, why is there still poverty alleviation? Why is there still poverty? Anyway, so I think it doesn't help to... I don't think it helps to actually ask that question. And I don't think it helps to have a dichotomous yes or no. Life is much more complex than that. You have to take a nuanced approach. It's where we can intersect. So I think it's much more important to look at ways we can actually collaborate together, because poverty is not a simple issue. It's a very complex issue. You can't just take one view and say that's it. It's a combination of all these views. And I think business can learn a lot from social policy about social justice, of course. So we are talking about vulnerable consumers, where sometimes the choices are you buy a skin whitening cream or you don't eat. So those are some of the choices they might face. There's a real life example in India. And to that end, we actually developed a new unit in the business school where we basically challenge people who are doing masters in business to ask this question: where does your passion meet the world's greatest needs for a profit? So,
Sorry.
So I think that's a really, let me repeat that because I think that's really core. Where does your passion meet the world's greatest needs, but making profit at the same time? I think that's a fundamental question. And I think it is now in 2015 we asked that question. Maybe previously that was not the case. And as a business academic, what have I learned from my own research? One of the important things that I've learned is that businesses look at poverty as income, money. But I think one of the greatest insights for me has been that poverty does not just mean income deprivation, but both capabilities and freedoms. So for example, when we were doing research in India, this lady who was doing microfinance did really great. She was a great entrepreneur, and she increased her goats from 5 to 15 or something like that. But then she had to go home and give that money to the husband who drank it. So the question here is, she might be income rich, but freedom poor. So we have to look at poverty in a much broader perspective. And the second thing is, and that's why I'm wearing a tie. So
he always wears a tie.
And I don't. I'm not that rich as an academic to buy a $300 watch, but my father gave it to me, so anyway. So the second thing I've learned is, as a business academic, I think I'm an expert, right? And one of the most transformational experiences for me when I'm actually interviewing this poor woman is I'm not. Okay? So what I'm wearing today is worth about $600, right? And if you kind of divide that by $5 a day, 4 billion, it's 120 days of wages, daily wages. So who am I? Who am I to tell them that's, you know what? I am going to come there because I studied a PhD or whatever, and I'm going to solve your problems. I don't think that's a really good approach. So I'm not the expert. And I think my research became much better when I understood, don't talk, just listen. Okay? When this poor woman were talking. So I think these two were some of the greatest insights that Suzanne and her field has given me.
Oh, thanks, Ranjit. Is that me?
Yeah.
Okay, so what did I learn from working with business and working with Ranjit? This point that he jokingly made before about, well, if social policies and community development are the best way to alleviate poverty, why haven't you done it? It meant a lot to me. And I think I've learned that social policies, community development, and the kind of small-scale stuff that we're doing around microfinance are not enough to address poverty. The other thing I learned was that this greed is good mantra that has characterised our understanding of what business is and what business people are like, it no longer exists. The people we have encountered are not greed as good champions. That social justice principles are relevant to all our poverty alleviation efforts, and people in business are interested in social justice. I'm sorry, I know that sounds like you're really prejudiced of me to be surprised by this, but it's a welcome surprise. And also that sceptical engagement that we have towards each other is very, very productive. And so the polarisation that we have seen traditionally between our disciplines and in the community generally is working against poverty alleviation, not for it. Thank you.